An emotional plea from friends of a woman who is missing right now in the Skamania County wilderness.
Flying saucers, hovering discs, unexplainable shapes in the sky. UFOs have long been a part of Oregon's history.
Every year, hundreds of people are reported missing in national parks and forests. But a small percentage of the cases, some right here in Oregon, are never solved.
They did find a baseball cap, a camera, part of a skull, and just a few small bones.
Crews are back out today searching for a hiker missing in Olympic National Park.
There has been something in the skies above St. Helens.
Got a strange going on. I hear something just killed my dog. Something killed your dog? My dog went flying through the air over the tree. I don't know how it did it.
What started as a fun adventure ended with a very grisly discovery.
They were exploring a remote part of a beach in Seattle when they came across the mysterious black luggage. When cops got there, they confirmed the presence of human remains in the trash bag stuffed inside the suitcase.
But then people started to disappear.
And then bodies started turning up.
The shadow disappeared, and then 2 seconds later, we heard footsteps run across the entire length of the second floor. We then went upstairs to inspect the attic. Nobody was there.
People were washing up on the shore, literally shredded.
Hello everybody, welcome to episode 1 of Northwest Nightmares. I'm your host, Alex, coming to you from the heart of the Great Northwest, Washington State. I'd like to thank everybody who's tuning in for this first episode. I didn't expect to actually start a podcast, but here I am. I couldn't be more excited, because as someone who was born and raised in the Great Northwest, there is so much crazy stuff that goes on here that I've only learned about recently that I would just really love to dive into. So, as I said before in my first introduction, this podcast will primarily focus on interviewing people who have had crazy experiences here in the Great Northwest. Occasionally, like today, there will be times where I actually narrate the stories or submissions that are sent to the email. So our first guest, our first submission comes from a buddy of mine, Nathan. Call out to you there, buddy. And the second one is from a lady named Nina. Now, I'll let you guys know beforehand, Nina's submission is actually from Connecticut. I didn't know that at the time, but I'm not gonna say no to an awesome submission. We read through the story, and this one's actually pretty interesting. So, we got quite a treat for you guys tonight. So, let's dive into it today. Many years ago, I was in speech and debate in high school. I went all over Washington and Oregon with my team, going to different tournaments and competing in various events. One of my favorite tournaments was held at Pacific Lutheran University. I liked it, partly because they had a beautiful campus with lots of cool old buildings. On the last night of the tournament, I had finished my rounds and we were all waiting for the rest of the events to finish, and for the judges to tabulate our scores. While we waited, a buddy of mine, Joel, and I decided to go exploring around the campus. One building in particular caught my eye. It was a building called Marsh Hall. We had competed a few rounds inside the building, but hadn't really had the time to really explore it. It was a 3-story building, 4 if you count the basement level. It was tall, looming, made entirely of red brick, and had a sort of castle-like appearance. It even had a turret on one side. We went in using the elevator to travel between floors. The first 2 floors were nothing remarkable, just typical classrooms you would find in a college building. We took the elevator to the 3rd floor. That's when things got a bit weird. The floor itself was pretty normal. It seemed to be a collection of classrooms and administrative offices. However, as soon as we both got off the elevator, we noticed a strange sensation. The air was different, thick. It was like wind was swirling all around you, but not really. Almost like moving through water. It just wasn't me. Joel sensed it too. It was a dark, tense, uncomfortable sensation that continued until we both felt like we had to leave. "This place feels weird," Joel said. I agreed. So we took the elevator back down, Shaken, but not to the point where I would say we were frightened. We decided to go down to the basement level, the only floor we hadn't seen. Now I know what you're probably thinking. Not the basement. Well, before you come after me for breaking the one basic horror movie rule, let me just say this. Both Joel and I had been in rounds in the basement level during the tournament. It was pretty much just like levels 1 and 2, a series of classrooms. We looked around and decided to leave and see what else the campus had to offer. The best way to go outside from the basement was a small stairwell. The stairwell only ran from the basement to the outside of the building, and it was closed off on either side by a set of doors. So once you were in there, you knew who was in that stairwell. In this case, it was just me and Joel, nobody else. Or so we thought. We were almost halfway up the stairs when I heard something behind me. I turned my head, but there was nothing. We walked up a few more steps and I heard it again. I told Joel to stop. Following the sound of our own footsteps on the stairs, we could both hear a set of footsteps clapping against the stairs, following us up the stairwell. I remember the cold rush of fear I felt as we both rushed out of the stairwell and burst through the doors and out of that building. Needless to say, we cut our exploration short to seek the comfort of being part of a large group in a well-lit area. You would think that would be the end of it, but the story doesn't quite end there. A few months later, I mentioned that I had experienced a rather unusual phenomenon at Pacific Lutheran University to my English teacher. She told me she wasn't surprised. She had attended that university and had heard rumors of hauntings on the campus. She even told me that a young woman had committed suicide by jumping from the window of one of the buildings. "Which building?" I asked. A chill ran down my spine when she answered, "Marsh Hall." I wish I could say I had never had to go back to that building, but I did. At subsequent tournaments, I would feel a sense of dread every time I had a round in Marsh Hall. I went straight to the classroom, did my speech, and then left as soon as I could. Although I stayed away from that stairwell, I did have a round on the 3rd floor. Thankfully, I didn't feel the same sensation I did before, and I hope never to again. But there was one thing. There was a door at the end of the hall, with a small window looking into a dark room. Now, it was probably my imagination, but I thought for a quick moment I saw a woman's face looking out from the dark in that little window. And that wraps up Nathan's story submission. Thanks so much, Nathan, for submitting that story to me. It's actually really, really creepy. Maybe one of these days we'll have to go down to that university and visit that area again. Well, with you. I mean, it would be a first time for me. Summer in Hell, from Nina. The house I grew up in was haunted. My father, in his late 60s or early 70s, saw an apparition, and other weird things would happen. It was my grandparents' home, and my father, brother, and I moved in when my mom decided she wanted a divorce. Little things would happen here and there, like the feeling of being watched, walking around in my room, seeing shadows. One night I remember waking up terrified. I looked around the room, and sitting in a chair was this hideous, decaying-looking woman. Her eyes were pure whites, and her hair was a fiery red. She motioned me to come to her. I remember her having long fingernails, and when she motioned me to come to her, it was like a weird movement. Like the only way I can describe it was how actors would move in old picture films. The air was thick. The last thing I recalled was my head hitting the pillow. I woke up the next day just thinking about it. I told my cousin who was religious, and she said a prayer outside in front of the house. I got sick afterwards and believed it was a retaliation from this thing. I couldn't swallow, so I would refuse to eat. My grandma noticed I was getting thinner and not eating. She prayed and sprinkled holy water on me. I was able to eat. Fast forward, when I was 15 years old, I started to get involved with witchcraft and occult stuff. I was always into the paranormal. I had many books that had spells in it, and one book had summoning spells. My dad also bought me a spirit board. It was a big no-no in the house. My grandparents were really religious. I thought it was a great idea to try it out in the house. I used it, but nothing happened, so I continued to practice spells. At the time, my cousin would come over and play it too. Well, a couple nights later, something woke me up with growling in my ear. I couldn't move, but I can feel a presence there. This happened every night at the same time. I did get the courage to open my eyes once, and standing by my bed, a black hooded shadow figure was there, just watching me. After a while, I decided to move across the street. My aunt and cousin lived across the street from us. I thought it would go away and stop, but no, it followed me there. The same thing would happen. Something would growl in my ear to wake me up, and I couldn't move. I eventually decided to sleep on the floor in my aunt's room for a couple of nights. Well, directly across me from her room was the room that my bedroom was when I lived there. I felt like something was watching me the whole time, and I know it was pissed at me. One night when I slept in my room at my aunt's house, I was woken up and was not able to move, and when I opened my eyes, I saw two eyes staring back at me. It was glowing with slits like cat's eyes. I started to babysit during the week for my aunt, who lives in the town right next to us, and started to sleep over there Monday through Friday. I was happy to stay someplace out, still thinking it was not going to follow me. But it did. The first night when I was trying to fall asleep in the guest bedroom, there was a light above the bed that you had to touch, and it would dim on the first touch. Second touch be bright, and the third touch would turn the light off. Well, when I was laying in bed, the light started to act nuts, and went on and off, on and off. I noticed that the air got thick, so I ran out of the room. But when I closed the door behind, I had to park all quietly in the hallway, because I didn't want to wake my little cousin up. When I passed his room, I heard whispering coming from it. I assumed it was my cousin talking to himself, so I just tried to listen to what he was saying, but I couldn't understand it. I fell asleep in the living room, and in the morning I told my aunt that I think my cousin was up, and she told me he wasn't in his room last night, but was sleeping with her and my uncle the whole night. I realized that this thing was going to follow me everywhere I go, so I decided to move back to my grandparents' home when I wasn't working. One night over there, I was woken up with the growling and not being able to move. My foot was sticking out of the covers. It was the summertime. Something with sharp nails touched my foot. Another night, I slept downstairs because it was the coolest area in my house. I was woken up because I heard footsteps running down the stairs. I thought it was my father, but realized my father and brother went to a camping trip for the weekend. Not being able to move, standing in the doorway was this half-man, half-goat creature. It kept on disappearing and reappearing, until it got next to the sofa. It told me to go upstairs, and that my grandmother wanted me. I ran upstairs and went to where my grandma was, and she was sleeping. A few days later, my grandmother told me she was having reoccurring dreams about me signing a book with the devil. The activity started to get worse. I would take naps during the day to catch up on my sleep, because I was not sleeping at night. The thing would appear during the day. I was taking a nap and I opened my eyes because I felt a presence, and standing by my bed was a thing pretending to be my grandfather. Its eyes was full of hate, and it was very animalistic, the way it was standing. Not human-like. One Saturday, my other cousin was sleeping over, and I told her about this summoning book, and we did one of the spells. Well, something turned off the fan, and we heard walking around the room where I had to plug back the fan. It sounded like something with hooves. Eventually, this thing started to wake me up and talk to me. It told me it was going to kill my family, and then me. That was my last straw, and I decided to get rid of the board and the book. I threw it in the garbage. That night I was woken up with a thing telling me it was going to come back. When I got older, I got married and moved out. Periodically, I would have dreams about the half man and half goat. Some of the dreams were disgusting. A few years later, we bought a 2-bedroom condo and things were peaceful. When I became 30, I got pregnant with my first child. The second trimester, I would sometimes sleep downstairs on the sofa because my back would hurt. That night, I was woken up and I couldn't move. I could hear something jumping onto the banister and jumped onto the couch where I was sleeping. It touched my stomach. I woke up scared, thinking it hurt my baby. But my baby was okay. When my son was born, he would sleep in his bassinet by my bed. One night, I was laying in bed watching TV, and my son was in his bassinet. I noticed my TV was blacking out. I looked up, and walking in front of the TV was the black hooded shadow figure, and it went into the wall. I was petrified because now I had a baby. One night, my son was sleeping in his crib, and I had the baby monitor. I was woken up with something laughing on the baby monitor that he was going to choke to death. I ran into his room, and his blanket was wrapped around his head. When my son was 2, he would wave to someone outside, and no one was there. I went into his room one morning and my son had his cover on his head, and he was growling at something in his room. He looked like he was scared and seeing something. Things here and there would happen, but nothing like what would happen when I was 15. I do believe the thing is being dormant. And that concludes Nina's story. Honestly, I was not really expecting to receive a story that insane. But my thoughts are, just don't mess with the occult or with anything that has to do with Ouija boards or spirit boxes or that kind of stuff. That's just my personal recommendation, but you know, do whatever you want. Thank you guys for tuning in. Hopefully we'll get another episode out within the next few days. I'm Alex, your host, coming to you from the heart of the Great Northwest, Washington State, and I hope you have a wonderful night. Once again, I'd like to thank Carl Casey from whitebataudio.com for providing the music you've heard in this episode. Be sure to visit his YouTube page, White Bat Audio, on YouTube.